Hi everyone, my name is Maddie, welcome back to my channel and welcome to my June wrap-up. So this video feels a lot later than I expected it to be. I thought doing it sort of like just after a week into the month would be pretty standard, that's when most people were doing it, and no, I'm sitting here filming it and almost everyone has already posted theirs, so for future I will be definitely filming it earlier. But I had a decently successful reading month in June actually. It didn't start off great, but it really picked up towards the end, especially the last few days. If you watch my vlogs you will have seen I was massively successful in the last few days, and I actually was taking part in the Make Your Myth Taker Readathon and did complete the challenge, however not in remotely the way I intended to. So as I go through the books I read, I will be going through what prompts they fulfilled for that and then what my endpoint was for that readathon. But yeah, definitely not what I said it was going to be in my TBR at all. I read completely different books in the end. But just to start off this video, I really wanted to do some stats. I love stats. I come from like an engineering background, so I absolutely love numbers and stats and I always track them. So I just thought I'd quickly run you through a few stats about how I read during the month. So I read a total of 10 books, which I'm really happy with. It's a little bit below sort of my average, but not too bad. So I'm happy with 10. I always try and hit double digits, so happy with that. And that puts me at having read a total of 56 books this year out of my goal of 72. So I'm definitely getting there and I should be way on track to finish my goal by the end of the year. And the total number of pages I read in the month was 3,133. This doesn't actually equate to the exact number of all the books added up because I track the pages I read every single day. And so I specifically count that as the number of pages I read. So for example, the first book I read, I partially read in May, and so that has a few pages taken off. But the average length of the book I read is 336, which is actually quite short for me as I read quite a lot of fantasy, they're often longer. But this year I found that less. I'm reading a lot more adult and a lot more contemporary, so they're often shorter. But yeah, 336 was the average length of the book I read. But the 3,133 breaks down into an average of 104 pages a day, which I'm thrilled about because I always try and read an average of 100 pages a day, and I really did not think I was going to hit that at the beginning of the month. I was really behind, but I pulled it back in the second half, so that was good. Another stat I track is my average star rating, and my average star rating this month actually worked out at bang on 4 stars, but just to break that down, I read 2 5-star books, 5 4-star books, and then 3 3-star books. But just to clarify, if I, for example, rated something 3.5, which I did multiple times this month, that will class as a 3 in my listing for just how many I rated in each star rating. The other things I track are genre and age range. So quickly for age range, I read 3 adult books, 2 YA books, and then 3 middle grade books. You'll notice there's 2 others missing, which is a poetry collection and a graphic novel, which I'm not really sure how to class in those. So for genre, I read 5 fantasy books, 3 contemporary books, and then I read 1 historical mystery and 1 anthology. So that's just a quick overview, but I'm now going to jump into the books I read and I'm just going to go through them in the order I read them, and alongside that I will explain what prompt they fit for the Make Your Myth Taker Readathon. So when I'm going through these, I'm going to go through them in the order that I finished them, which is not necessarily the order I picked them up in because some of these books took me a really long time to read and it was a bit sort of chaotic this month, but this will be the order I completed the books in, as I find that's the easiest way to keep track of it all. So the first book I read was Percy Jackson and the Titan's Curse by Riordan. This didn't fulfill any prompts for the Make Your Myth Taker. This was just a book I started in May but didn't quite finish before the end of the month, so I had to quickly finish off. I read multiple Percy Jackson books this month, so I'm not going to go into a synopsis for all of them, as obviously it is a series, but this follows Percy, who is 12 at the beginning of the series and discovers he is half human, half god, and I'm sure most of you already know this as it's a very well-known and well-loved series. But it follows him sort of discovering what it means to be half human, half god, or demigod, and then from that going on a whole host of different adventures to defeat the ultimate bad guy of Kronos. So I really enjoyed this series. It was a reread for me, but it was just really enjoyable as I read it so many years ago I barely remembered it. And I gave this 4 stars. I gave actually all of them 4 stars, spoiler for the rest of the video. But they're just really, really nostalgic, and I really enjoyed the third book more than the first 2 because it certainly got much more complex. You learn a lot more about the characters and it felt like a lot was starting to be revealed. And so I really, really enjoyed this one, and yeah, I gave it 4 stars. I don't have too much to say on it. As I said, it's a reread, but it's a nostalgic, really nice series, and I'm really, really glad I did complete the reread of this. So the second book I read in the month was The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune, and this was for the Make Your Myth Taker prompt of going to a book blind, which was on the Oracle path, and I absolutely went into this blind. I had no idea what it was before picking it up, but I'm so glad I did. I gave this 5 stars. This is absolutely a new favourite, and I'm definitely going to be checking out. And I'm definitely going to be checking out more TJ Klune books in future because I really, really loved this. But this follows Linus, who works what we'd consider a very mundane day job. He is very bored, he sits at a desk all day and really doesn't enjoy it. But what he does is he goes into orphanages as a caseworker to check that they are suitable places to have children. But there's a slight twist because these orphanages do not host normal children, they host magical beings. And this can be anything. There's a dragon, there is a creature that no one knows what it is, there are gnomes, it's all sorts of magical beings. But this book was just beautiful. Linus was such an interesting character, even though he started off as maybe a bit grumpy and a bit boring. He really sort of grew throughout the book alongside many of the other characters. And the children were just phenomenally written and so adorable, and I really loved reading about them. And then there is also a male-male romance between Linus and someone else in the book, and that in itself is so sweet, and just it's such a found family, finding your place in the world and feeling happier because of it sort of story, but set in a kind of light fantasy setting. And yeah, it's beautiful. I loved the writing, I loved the story. So yeah, 5 stars, new favourite. Highly recommend people check this out because it is absolutely brilliant. The next book I read is Percy Jackson and the Battle of the Labyrinth, again by Riordan. Again, I won't give another synopsis, I gave this 4 stars. This was for the Make Your Myth Take a prompt again on the Oracle path for a book with a foiled cover, which this evidently does have. And again, I really enjoyed it. Similar to what I said for the 3rd book, this advanced the plot and the complexity even further. And I just really started to fully fall in love with the characters and get so invested in the story by this point in the series. And also really did not remember what happened in this from the first time I read it, so it was almost like reading it for the first time, although I kind of knew what the resolution would be. But yeah, brilliant book, and I'm sure you've all read this series by now, but I would recommend it if you haven't, because it's definitely a very fun read. Next, I read Beach Read by Emily Henry, and this was on the Oracle path for a book about books, and it kind of is. It's a book about authors writing, so I'm gonna call that close enough. And this was really good fun, actually. I was more complimentary about it when I just read it. When I read it, if you watch my reading vlogs, you'll have seen my thoughts sort of throughout reading it and when I just finished it. And I was really quite complimentary. And it is good. I did get swept up in the story and I did enjoy it. But having reflected on it, having had a bit more time away from it, it's not as good as I originally thought it was. It's sort of faded into obscurity quite quickly. It didn't stick with me really at all. This is a story about 2 characters who are basically both struggling authors in different ways, and they end up being neighbours in different beach houses. They meet and it turns out they actually knew each other before, so it's an old rivalry being brought back up, and they set themselves a challenge of writing each other's genres. One writes romance, one writes very much literary fiction, dark literary fiction. And so they set themselves the challenge of writing each other's genres and seeing who can sell a book first. And obviously romance ensues, as it is a contemporary romance novel. And it was sweet. I got frustrated at it quite a lot. It was an on again, off again, on again, off again romance. But it felt like every time it was falling apart was only put in to cause drama. It didn't feel realistic. It didn't feel like the relationship would generally have done that. It just felt like the author was kind of trying to drag the book out a bit further, and it is quite long for a romance book. So although I did enjoy it and I got swept up in it whilst reading it and I cared about the relationship, having sort of sat back from it for a minute, this was actually only a 3-star read for me. And again, it's not bad at all, like 3 stars, completely fine, middle of the road, but it's definitely not stuck out and it's definitely not one of my favourite romance books that I've ever read. So after Beach Read, I read The Love Hypothesis by Laura Stephen. This book fulfilled the first prompt I needed to complete the Goddess path, which was to randomise your TBR. And I kind of cheated with this. I didn't actually randomise my TBR. However, this was sent to me off my wish list. And so obviously I didn't have choice as to which book was chosen off the wish list, so I'm calling that randomised as someone else very much chose for me and had no influence from me for which book to pick. It was just off my wish list, this is the one they chose. So I'm counting that as random. This is a YA contemporary book and follows a girl named Caro who sort of is in love with the high school main guy, and she's very much a physics nerd and feels like she's below him. And so she ends up taking this drug, which basically should make her massively appealing to anyone that would naturally be attracted to her in any way. And kind of chaos ensues. I did enjoy that it was a real twist. Like, I did not expect a YA contemporary romance to be about taking a drug that makes you attractive. I thought it would be a lot more sort of like not fantastical than that. So that was definitely unexpected and good fun. And I really enjoyed that she massively loved physics. I was hugely into physics at school. It was my favourite subject. I was so much like Caro, though slightly less self-deprecating. And so it was really nice reading that. But my biggest complaint with this is the marketing versus the story you get. It says on the back, the first line on the back is a hilarious LGBT love story with a twist. Twist, fine, absolutely covered. LGBT plus love story, less so. I was slightly disappointed, I'm not gonna lie. I knew this had bi rep, and it did have bi rep in about the last 50 pages, which is not really what I was hoping for. It was interesting, and I did root for the relationships, and I did like the romance when it happened towards the end, but I just wish it had happened a lot earlier, because by the time it happened so fast, it felt completely underdeveloped, and I didn't really care about it, which isn't obviously at all what I want to be feeling. So this wasn't remotely a bad book. I massively enjoyed it. I had great fun reading it, but I spent the whole book sort of thinking, where's the LGBT? Like, loads of the side characters are LGBT, which is fantastic. But when you're being sold an LGBT love story, you kind of assume that's going to be the focus of the book, at least in some way. And it doesn't have to be. I'm happy reading LGBT side characters, or that's a complete non-plot point. But when that's the tagline, it's sort of what you come to expect. And it sadly was not that really at all. It was, I guess I said, really good fun. I sat giggling whilst reading this, and it was nicely written. It was YA Contemporary, wasn't anything spectacular. But I did feel really quite let down from the marketing of this book. And also, this is possibly going into spoiler territory, so don't watch if you don't want to. The main character does identify as bisexual, and I'm not saying anyone has to have this big moment of realization or this big coming out or anything like that. Everyone's story is their own and is valid. But she just has this sudden moment where, oh, actually, I really care about my female best friend. And then this guy she just broke up with goes, oh, so you're bi then? And she goes, yeah, I guess I am. And that's it. And I'm not saying it needs more focus than that necessarily, but it really, really felt like it was just shoved in at the end and wasn't the focus of the book at all. And I've been thinking back since reading it that had I missed sort of like written in bits really early on that were sort of hinting at it. And no, I don't think I did. She clearly cared for her best friend. And I mean, you can read anything LGBT if you want to. I mean, we all do all the time, but it really felt like it got turned on its head right at the last minute to make it an LGBT love story, which was a shame because I was really excited to read this and it just wasn't quite what I expected it to be, and it didn't live up to my expectations. But I did give it 3.5 stars. As I said, it was a very enjoyable book, but just go into it knowing that it's not LGBT focused. It does have an LGBT relationship, but that's absolutely not the focus, nor is it actually the main relationship of the majority of the book. After that, I read The Black Flamingo by Dean Atta. This fulfilled the final Oracle prompt, which was a 5-star prediction. Sadly, this wasn't quite a 5-star for me, but it was a 4-star. I really, really, really enjoyed it. I can't quite describe why this wasn't quite a 5-star. I really loved it and it's definitely stuck with me, but it didn't just have that, 5-star feeling, which is often really hard to quantify. This follows a mixed-race boy from the UK who identifies as gay, and it follows him from a really young age all the way through to him being at uni, which I loved. I loved that it focused on him for such a broad period of time. A lot of books either only focus up to the age of 18 or only focus past that, so I really loved seeing the progression and how his view of things changed, because obviously there's a lot of things which you learn as a child at the age of 18. You become aware of a lot of different things, especially to do with his race and sexuality and how he perceives it and how other people perceive him because of it. But you also learn a lot more when you go to uni, because all of a sudden you're sort of out of the bubble of people you've always grown up with, you're away from your family, you're out on your own. And so you learn a lot more, a lot changes in that time. And so I really liked that that part of this was included, because it really does make quite a lot of difference to the points that are being raised and the perspectives that are being shown in the book. So as I said, the main character Michael is mixed race and identifies as gay, and he struggles with a lot of this, especially his race. He grows up almost being slightly unaware of it, and then gradually is involved in some incidents involving racism and almost rejects his race at times and really struggles to feel comfortable in either part of his race as he's mixed race. And it's really, really interesting to see, especially a book about this written from an author in the UK, from the perspective of someone in the UK, as I read so much fiction set in the US that it was nice to get an actual UK perspective. And when he goes to uni, he ends up actually sort of finding himself by involving himself in drag, which was really interesting. He didn't go there with a view to doing it, but that's where he ended up finding his people and finding his identity. And I just really loved how that community was shown. And he learned a lot and grew a lot throughout the book. And this is also written in verse, and it is a stunning book physically. It has illustrations and all sorts throughout. And it was a really, really, really stunning book and I'm glad I read it, and I will probably reread it in future if I'm honest. I think it's definitely one I'll revisit. And I loved how every single thing the author was saying really felt there was a point to it. There was so few words, but no wasted words, certainly. But I really enjoyed it and I would highly recommend it, and it was a 4-star read for me. So already from the last 2 books, I had gone completely out of order with my Make Your Myth Taker TBR, but it gets even more chaotic from here on. So the next book I read was actually a prompt for the Monarch Path, which was a reread. So I read the last book in the Percy Jackson series, Percy Jackson and the Last Olympian. I'm not going to say much. Again, 4-star, brilliant, got more and more complex. Really did actually intrigue me to continue possibly onto the Heroes of Olympus series, which is the follow-on series from this. But my biggest thing I would say is this is how you end a series. Oh my gosh, the last sort of 20, 30, maybe even 50 pages, the big battle scene, big drama, but it was that almost small section of, not quite epilogue, but just that bit of detail after all the drama had died down that really makes you just want more and also feel really like everything is brought together and ended really nicely. So brilliant ending to a series. Rick Riordan knows what he's doing, but we all know that. So yes, another 4-star read. The next book I finished, which was probably the biggest cheat in trying to fill a prompt from the whole month, was The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafon. If you watched almost any of my vlogs, you will know I struggled to read this book. I don't know why, I just kept putting it down, I wasn't picking it up. It was quite a slow read for me, which when I was like struggling to read anyway, was just not what I needed. But I did end up finishing it and I ended up giving it 5 stars. But this was to fulfill the prompt for a Monarch of Read a book with red, purple or gold on the cover. And this is where I'm cheating. You can see his name is written in gold. So that's counting for gold on the cover because I was reading it anyway and I didn't have time to pick up a different book. So we were going with that. This follows a boy, Daniel, who when he's quite young, he finds a book and just absolutely falls in love with it. But then all sorts of weird goings on begin, and basically it seems like someone is trying to track down the book he has, which seems to be the last copy of it, and burn it. And burn every copy of every book that author had ever written. And this is a fascinating, beautiful historical mystery. I don't really read mysteries and I don't really read historical fiction, but this was absolutely brilliant and I really, really loved it, even though it took me forever to read. And I will say the first maybe 100 pages I really enjoyed. The next 100 to 150 I struggled with. There are so many character names and so much going on and these tiny, tiny tidbits of information you're being given that I couldn't keep it all straight. I couldn't work out who was who, how everyone related, how it all related to the central plot, and I really struggled with it, which is why I ended up putting it down for a bit. But I'm so glad that I did, because when I picked it back up, all that information had sort of sunk in and I could piece everything together so much better, and it meant the end of the book was really, really great. As I said, this is a mystery and I'm not going to give you any indication of how it ends because that would be a huge spoiler. But the thing I can say is I've never read a mystery that was resolved so perfectly. When the information was revealed, it's kind of so clever that you probably wouldn't have guessed what it was going to tell you, but it's all the information was there. You definitely had all the information. And I pieced a few of the bits together, but definitely not everything. But there was absolutely no sense of things being thrown at you at the last minute so that it's all big surprise, which frustrates me. I want all the information to be there, even if I've ended up figuring out the ending. But this was done so cleverly that all the information was given to you, but you really would have had to look through it all to piece it together yourself, meaning it was all massively surprising when it was all revealed at the end. Again, I will not say too much because this book would be so easy to spoil so quickly, but I can absolutely say that I loved the ending of this book. It had me. I didn't think it was going to go in the direction that it did, and I was worried, but I was happy. It went in the direction I wanted it to, so I'm very, very happy. This is absolutely a 5-star read for me, and I think it will stick with me for a very long time. The problem is I really want to reread this almost straight away, but I know it will be one that I almost want to wait like 5 to 10 years before I reread, so I don't remember all the details, so that when I'm rereading it, I can really pick up on those details as I go along, knowing the final answer, but not right now when I'm already familiar with everything that's just been revealed to me. So I would highly recommend this to honestly anyone, especially if you like really beautiful writing. As I said, I don't tend to read mysteries and I definitely don't tend to read historical fiction. I don't tend to enjoy it, but I loved this. So don't let that ever put you off. It is a brilliant book and I'm sure you will love it if you love beautiful writing and honestly just an exceedingly clever and masterfully done plot. The next book I finished was LGBTQ Fiction and Poetry from Appalachia. And I don't really know how to review this. This was for the highest rated on my TBR prompt, which was for the Goddess Path. But it definitely wasn't that highly rated for me. I struggle with anthologies. I enjoy poetry collections. I've not read many, but I enjoy them. But there's been very, very few short story collections that I enjoy. And I know that, but I always want to enjoy them. So again, this one sounded so interesting. It was this point of view of people that I've never really seen their point of view before, so I thought it'd be fascinating. But I did struggle with it. I didn't actually end up reading all of this. I don't consider it DNF. I'm considering it read because I did read the majority, but I did skip a few of the short stories. I just wasn't feeling them. I was really struggling to get through them, so I did skip some, but I do intend to go back and read them in future. I don't have any strict deadline or time for this, but one day when I want to sort of dip into something, I will read them. But I will say the poetry in this, in general, I really enjoyed. The problem I think I had is a lot of the poetry I read is quite modern, and although this is modern, it's recent work, it was often in a slightly more classical style, I guess. And genuinely, it was so poetic and lyrical that some of it I didn't understand. I would read the whole poem and get to the end and sort of sit there like, I don't really know what was just said. And that's on me. I'm not educated in poetry. I need to read more and become more familiar with it over time, but that will take time. So there were definitely parts of this where I was sort of almost lost for quite a chunk of it, which was a shame, but I did enjoy it. There was a few poems that really stood out. There was one quote which I'm actually going to read out because I loved it. This is in a poem by Nicole Brown, and the quote was just, "You will miss it, not the man, but the normal the man brings," which I just absolutely loved. I thought that was such a beautiful quote and really is quite telling. Like, you're not going to miss having men by being with a woman, but you might miss the normality that being with a man brings. It is a very different view society will have if you change that. So I just thought that was really interesting, and that line just really hit home for me. There was also one short story in this I did absolutely love that I wanted to highlight. So the short story I wanted to highlight was How to Be Beautiful by Silas House, and that was a gorgeous story about a boy who is gay, and again, it's in an area where that's not necessarily accepted, so he was quite young and he wasn't particularly accepted for this and didn't feel confident in his family, but his older sister actually takes him to a drag club, and it's just so sweet. They meet another boy, I say boy, they're sort of 16, 17 at least, if not older. They meet another person when they're out who is there with his mother, which is also really endearing, and it's just showing this one night, which was obviously really formative and important, and I just really, really enjoyed reading that. It was really sweet, and I really enjoyed that. But overall, I think I'm giving this a 3.5 stars. For the bits I read, I think that's a fair rating. Again, I didn't understand or love all the poetry, but some of it was really good, and similar with the short stories. But for whatever reason, the collection as a whole didn't grab me, so I'm going to go with 3.5 stars. However, I would massively recommend this if you're looking for LGBTQ literature from a different perspective, because again, a lot of the fiction we see is based either in the US or the UK or other Western cultures quite regularly. So although this is still Western, as it's Appalachia, and it is in the US, it is a very different community to a lot of the fiction, at least I've read, about LGBTQ people. So it was definitely an interesting insight into another side of things. So then the very final book I read in June was literally just before midnight, just to complete this Make Your Myth Take a Readathon, and that was Saga Volume 1, which I read for the prompt of a secret book, as, you know, I could just read it quickly and then talk about it, meaning I'd completed it before speaking about it, which counts as secret. And I really enjoyed this. I gave this 4 stars. It wasn't quite 5. I struggle often to give graphic novels 5 stars, but it was really good. There was so much more story packed into like 170 pages than I ever could have anticipated. I just was shocked by how much story they got through, and I definitely want to pick up more volumes in this series because it was beautiful. The art style is really gorgeous. It's massively detailed, which is actually something I've not seen too much. A lot of the graphic novels I read are quite sort of sketchy or artistic and sort of impressionist instead of very detailed. And I almost enjoyed that it didn't stick to a colour scheme. Again, a lot of the ones I've read have a very distinct colour scheme throughout, and I enjoyed that this was just full colour, whatever fit the scene, and it was really, really beautiful. I don't know even how to describe the story. Basically, these main 2 characters you see on the front are from different races, warring races, and so the fact that they are together and have a child is absolutely not allowed. And also the woman is, I think, an basically military person, and the man is an ex-convict. So definitely a lot of tension, and so it's them basically trying to escape and have their child and have their family and be happy, but they're being hunted down by both sides. So it's very chaotic, but really interesting. I was absolutely gripped reading it. And as I said, I really want to continue with the series, and I definitely will soon, as I do already own the second volume. I'm not sure when I'll buy more though, at some point in the future probably. So that's what I read for the month. As I said, I'm pretty happy with how much I got through. It was 10 books, which is about what I would like to get through generally, so I'm pretty happy with that. I obviously would have liked to have read more, but I managed my daily page goal, I managed 10 books, I completed Make Your Myth Taker, so overall it was definitely a successful reading month. And yeah, I'm very happy. Obviously it was a shame a couple of the books didn't quite live up to my expectations, but overall I had 2 5-stars and a lot of 4-star books, so I cannot really complain at all. Picking this up is probably a bad idea, but just to show you, this is the stack of what I read, so it's actually quite a sizable stack, which I'm pretty happy with. But that's pretty much it for this video, so thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you'd like to see more content from me. All my other socials are linked down below if you want to connect in any other way, but that's it for today, so bye, and I'll see you in the next one.